think the main thing that I have learned, and talking to my many guests and many emails from my listeners, is even though you think, oh gosh, I don't know what to say, saying nothing is worse than saying something sort of a bit blunt or tactless, or you know getting it wrong. I remember I was in the back of the car and I started crying, and I thought, why are you crying? What? Like, I was so confused, and then I was like, oh, that's what dads do, isn't it? Like, dads like look at you and make sure you got in cabs. And I haven't had one since I was 15. So I honestly, it was like alien behavior. I was like, okay, he's making sure I get into a car at 1:30 in the morning. Why? Like, I know how to walk. So yeah, I was so sad. And then in my head, I was like, stop making Jack D your dad. He's not your dad. Grief literally makes you feel like no one else understands. It makes you feel alone. It lights up the same part of your brain that does when you have depression. And because your grief is unique and only you can experience it, it's true. It is an isolating experience.
Hello, welcome back to Bestsellers. I'm Phil Williams.
And I'm Natalie Jameson.
And I'm the problem here. I'm the reason why these episodes didn't land in January when they should have done. Because I've had a very
I thought you were just talking in general.
In general, yeah. It's how we introduce ourselves as a duo whenever at a drinks event. I'm Phil, this is Natalie, I'm the problem one. I had a really nasty bacterial infection in my lungs, which took 2 courses of antibiotics and a chest x-ray to kind of get the all clear on. So I'm coming out of it now. I wouldn't say I was 100%. I'm not going to do a marathon anytime soon, but I'm kind of coughing less and all the rest of it. But it meant that we couldn't finish these. We'd done a couple of recordings for you and we couldn't finish editing them, which is a real shame. So I'm very sorry about that. It was not Natalie's fault. It was my fault. But the good news, Nat, is that not only are we back, but you've got a spreadsheet.
I have got a spreadsheet, which I think my husband especially will just be thrilled to learn that I independently started a spreadsheet.
Did he teach you how to do them?
No, he didn't. I didn't. I did have to do them sometimes in my day job back in the day.
He's just really fond of them then.
He loves a spreadsheet. Yeah, he's like, going anywhere on holiday or anything, he's got the spreadsheet, like anything with, finances or mortgage applications and stuff. He can show me a spreadsheet, whereas I'm like, oh, look, I have this scribble on this piece of paper, or like, let me just get that random note I did on my phone as well. Oh, and there's like a Post-it that's over there. I'm that sort of person when it comes to collating information, but I think I hold lots of it in my brain. So that's
I'm going to claim the higher ground for us both here. And I'm going to say it's because we're creative. So we get an idea and we have to scroll it down there and there.
Yeah. We see James, my husband, would then be like, hang on a minute. He's creative too. He just like displays it in a different way.
Right.
But anyway, enough about spreadsheets. There is though one for bestsellers, because there's loads of authors we want to chat to and share our love of what they've been writing recently, because as ever, there are so many books out there, right, to be read, and sometimes it can be quite hard to navigate your way through what might pique your interest. So let us take some of that, it's not a burden, but let us take some of that job for you and hopefully help.
Well, it's a minefield, I would say, is what it is. I mean, I would say on average about 3 people a week will WhatsApp me and go, mate, got any book recommendations? I'm going away, or I've got a journey coming up. And
I get that all the time as well.
There you go. And that's why we do this.
Yeah, we do. Actually, I love it when people say that to me. When I'll get random WhatsApps and stuff going, oh, like I'm on a plane tomorrow. Like, what should I pick up at the airport? Or what do you recommend? And I feel that thinks we must be doing something right.
So don't worry what season it is. Don't worry if we're halfway through. If we've started anew, it doesn't matter. Just enjoy some brilliant writers coming your way in the next few weeks. Do we want to tantalise yet or not?
Yeah, we can do. So we've got Jojo Moyes coming up a little bit later this series. I am so excited to speak to Joanne Harris, and I'm putting that out there because we haven't got a confirmed date for her yet, but she's pretty good. She's kind of stands by her word, and I've read many of her books and just really love her ethos on the way she handles so much of the writerly life. So I'm looking forward to that one. You've got some great thriller writers on the way.
Yeah, Jason Rekulak is a guy who I really admire because he writes different things. So the first book of his, I think it's called Impossible Fortress, is a comedy, really, like a teen comedy about a kid who's part of a group of boys whose their only dare in life is to go into a newsagent and buy a porno mag, right? And when he gets selected to try and fulfill this dare, he ends up falling for the newsagent's daughter, who's the same age as him. And so he doesn't really want to buy this mag because actually they just talk about gaming all the time. And so they end up developing a game for a games competition. So that's kind of really like Spielberg-esque 80s film story. The book he's going to talk to us about, Hidden Pictures, is a psychological thriller, which is really quite chilling, all about a woman who gets a child mining gig for a 5-6-year-old who can draw these astonishing pencil sketches, but they're of quite devastating scenes. I don't want to say much more because Natalie's only just started reading it and I read it last year.
We don't want to spoil it for anybody listening either.
No, and I've just had to reassure Natalie and say, no, it's okay. You won't have nightmares because it's not full on horror. It's kind of psychological thriller, I would say. So Jason's coming up. And yeah, there's loads. We've got a couple of other writers that we're just firming up for you that will be really good. Curtis Sittenfeld is confirmed.
Yeah, I'm really excited
we're
about
both
that.
really excited. I've never interviewed her. Never interviewed her.
So good.
So yeah, so it's a treat. We're tantalizing you with a fantastic array of writers. And the only rule is that if you walk into a bookshop, you'd find them at the front of the bookshop. That's the rule. It's big, popular books that we think you will like.
Or I would caveat that as well to say books that we think should be on those tables, because sometimes
sometimes they miss out.
Yeah, exactly. Just because, they're not so well known to start with, but the books are best selling in terms of they just really grab your attention and are incredibly well written and well thought out. So that's what I love doing, as well as just discovering new authors, which is kind of what that table in the bookshops do, right? A lot of the times I'm kind of looking at those going, I don't know any of those, but you want to pick it up and read the back and see if it's going to grab you to want to read. So that's our role here.
What's Welsh for darling?
I don't know.
You should know. It's our next guest. Cariad.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, my best friend's Welsh. She'll be very disappointed in me.
That you didn't know that. Yeah.
Sorry, Nerys. Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't think we talked about that with her, did we?
No, probably not.
Yeah.
No,
maybe she must get that all the time.
That's what I figured. Yeah. I figured she would, yeah.
But she's written this incredible book about grief. You might know Cariad from Griefcast. And we'll kind of get into this really early on, but I was a little bit anxious because I have an issue with death. I think quite a lot of people do. So I was like, yay, let's do a book about death and grief. But actually...
do you mind me asking what your issue is? Is it about your own mortality?
Let's not get into that here. Come on.
Why not? We've got all the time in the world.
Yeah, no, I think we just need to get into the author. It's fine.
Sorry, I asked.
Who wants to die? I guess is what it comes down to.
I'd flip that and say, who wants to live forever?
Yeah, all right. Like I said, let's leave it to Cariad, shall we? Enjoy this conversation with Cariad Lloyd.
We are delighted to tell you that on this brand new edition of Bestsellers, we're being joined by a multi-talented author, writer, comedian, creator, podcaster, anything that ends in she can do it. And her book is called You Are Not Alone, and it's a non-fiction book for you, which explores grief, which won't be all that unfamiliar to you if you've at all dipped into Cariad Lloyd's podcast, Griefcast, which I think, Cariad, welcome to the program, by the way. I think that started 2016, didn't it?
Yeah. So it's just had its 6th birthday.
Yeah.
But this is its 7th year, to be confusing. It started at the end of 2016. So yeah, proud mother of a old podcast.
Yeah, but it's doing great, isn't it? I mean, the volume of downloads and stuff.
Yeah, no, it's been about, I mean, for somebody, I started it thinking I was going to do 4 episodes and that would be it. So I'm nearly at 200. So
wow.
I'm still a bit surprised that people still want to listen, because the initial thought was, oh yeah, no one really who wants to listen to people talking about death? No one. So I thought, well, it's just an idea that's bothering me. I'll do 4 episodes, and then I can let that idea go away and stop thinking, oh, maybe I should do that. It's like, it's done, go away, leave me alone. And then it didn't go away.
But you know what? The reason why there's such universality to the pod and to your book is that so I was reading your book over Christmas, and we had 2 bereavements.
And jolly Christmas read.
Yeah, but in a way, it shows why it's so universal, because we had news of 2 bereavements, not immediate, but still familial bereavements.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, so what do I say to the person who's directly affected now? And I didn't really know what to type on the WhatsApp message. And that's my starting point. And that's almost your starting point with this, isn't it? Is that it's something that's coming to all of us, death and, death of loved ones, but we don't really know what to say, do we?
That's the thing I think I found most frustrating in this journey that I've been on of talking about grief constantly on a weekly basis is it's not like it's a specialist subject. You know what I mean? It's not like not everybody's gonna go to university or get a mortgage or have a dog, you know, like things that like you've really got to choose those things. But everybody will either know someone who died very close to them, or at least, as you said, like in their family will have that experience, and most of us don't know what to say, don't know what to do, and it's sort of mad. Like when you sort of think about it logically, you're like, well, we should be practicing this right from the beginning, really, shouldn't we? Like we all know it's going to happen. It's not a surprise. You know, we all know people get old and they will die. Things happen. So why do we always act like when it happens, like, whoa, oh my God, how weird. A human died. Oh no, what should I say? So yeah, that's the point of this book, really. The sort of birthplace of it was to just provide a kind of practical, useful guide to dealing with grief in all its forms, and to provide something that wasn't sort of, you know, that kind of the other grief stuff that I had encountered when I was younger of like, oh, grief is this kind of very special process that must be set with a sunset and a beautiful font, and be like, no, look, this is going to happen. Let's just talk about it so you don't feel so stressed. Here we go.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? Is where either it's, you know, how I think it does still happen sometimes, but if people talk about cancer, they almost like whisper it, like,
oh yeah.
It's similar with grief or death or anything like that, right? There's almost a shame that people attach to it, or an awkwardness that doesn't have to be there. It's not saying that it obviously is a huge subject and you deal with it so well in this book, but everybody deals with it differently, and you just kind of have to work out which tools are going to help you, and talking is always eventually going to be a good thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really individual. And I say that a lot in the book, like, you know, your grief is your grief. No one else can understand it. And whatever helps you, you go for it. Don't worry. Whatever's working for you, as long as it's not like damaging you. But yeah, I think we have to start from a place of honesty. That's what I've tried to do in the book, and be like, look, no one loves talking about this. It's not like everyone's like, woohoo, I can't wait to ask someone when I bump into them in the high street and they tell me their mum just died. Yes, what a conversation. We all feel that feeling of like, oh my goodness, what should I say? And I think we also need to acknowledge that there's a weird human thing. And it makes sense when you think about us as like sort of tribal beings, of like when someone talks about death, we get scared. We think, oh, I don't want to die. Oh, I don't want people I love to die. And so we kind of like remove ourselves from that person slightly in a very like fair enough way, because the instinct is like, oh gosh, you know, I'm a human, I'm vulnerable. You're talking about something that makes me feel vulnerable. Ergo, I'm not going to talk to you. This is horrible. And it's trying to get past that kind of primal bit of your brain and be like, you're not going to die because you spoke to someone about their mum dying of cancer. Like, you're okay. So you kind of have to soothe yourself in these conversations and be like, you're okay. The people you love right now are okay, hopefully. And they're just expressing a very, very vulnerable feeling that you may one day experience. So it's kind of like trying to let that be there when these conversations happen, which is hard. And why I come back to what I said earlier, like, you just need to practice, because the more you practice it, the more you realize, oh, I can do this without panicking. I can do this without thinking, oh God, I don't want to talk about cancer in case I get cancer, in case someone I love gets it. And then you realize, oh, right, that's not how it works. It's not contagious by talking. So yeah, it's just practicing the conversations, which is not easy. That's what I'd say. It's not easy, but definitely worthwhile.
Because Cariad, one of the things I really struggle with is if someone tells me, you know, and it's normally like, how are you? Oh yeah, not so good. I found out this week so-and-so's died or whatever. I don't know what to say, because I feel that anything I say isn't going to help.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be empathetic towards my friend or the loved one who's lost somebody. But actually, death is so final.
Yeah.
We used to have this thing when I was working in news, and you know, you'd get breaking news, so-and-so's died. We'll update you on that. And I used to say to people, death is a condition that's very difficult to update.
Yes, very true. But I guess the thing that's interesting about that is like death is, but the people who are still here are still here and still need that support. So I think the main thing that I have learned, and talking to my many, many guests and many emails from my listeners, is even though you think, oh gosh, I don't know what to say, saying nothing is worse than saying something sort of a bit blunt or tactless, or getting it wrong. And we really, especially I think in this country, we really fear getting it wrong, because then we think, oh, I should know, I should have known what to do. Or why should you know how to say to someone, you haven't had any practice, no one talks about it, why on earth should you know how to do that? So it's that feeling, and I'm and even me, like, I will still meet people, and when I'm not in my grief mode, or I'm at the pub or something, and they're like, oh, so and so's dad just died, and I will still have the, oh yeah, make sure you bring it up. Oh, do they look sad? Should I say, like, we all go through that checklist in our head. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. And I think the key is to verbalize how you're feeling. So if you literally just say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say to you, that's really awful, but I just want you to know that I am here for you as much as I can be. And I hope that what I just said wasn't hurtful either. This is a really awful situation. Like, something as muddy as that is going to make the person feel, oh, at least they're trying. Like, and that's really what you want when you're grieving, is for people to try, because you feel very isolated. Grief literally makes you feel like no one else understands. It makes you feel alone. It lights up the same part of your brain that does when you have depression. And because your grief is unique and only you can experience it, it's true. It is an isolating experience. So you need people who love you to constantly kind of remind you, like, I am here. It might not feel like I'm here, or it might not feel like I can do anything, but I am here. And I would also say we all act with the conversation like we can only do it once. So it's absolutely fine to bump into someone in the high street. They say that thing, you go, oh, right. Anyway, I've got to go. I've got to go to the post office, and then walk away thinking, oh my God, I handled that so badly. It's totally fine to send a message. I'm so sorry, I handled that really badly. I was so shocked, I didn't know what to say, but I'm thinking of you. Let me know, not let me know if I could do anything, because that's not that helpful. But to message someone after you've done the crap conversation, also fine. To send a card after you've done the crap conversation, also fine. In a month, to check in, hey, I remember I saw you a month ago, just wondering, like, if you'd had the funeral, how that all went. Are you still having to deal with all the admin? I'm happy to pop round and have a chat about it with you. Like, you can keep making it okay, or keep checking in with people rather than making it okay. So don't feel like you have to get it perfect first time, and if you don't, that's it, they'll never speak to you again, because that's not true.
Do you know what I really enjoyed about the book as well? And I mean this as an absolute compliment, but it's indicative of the way we've just been talking now, is that it kind of goes all over the place whenever you're talking about grief. Like, I know there is a structure to the book, and I know you've set it out in a particular way, and you've got anecdotes, but it's kind of circular and it zigzags. And I don't think, but I found that really comforting, because I don't think there's any other way that you can talk about grief and these big subjects. Your brain's always going to go, oh, that's reminding me of this, or and so it kind of felt very natural. Were you conscious that was happening while you were writing?
My brain, it's very funny you said it, but my brain, as you may have noticed from talking to me for 5 seconds, zigzags quite a lot.
Mine too.
That's how it works. Many tabs. But I think that's why I like talking about grief, because, as you said, you can't break it down that clearly, because it touches everything. It's like trying to break down, parenting, really, in a way, or just living. It's, there's so many aspects of it that touch other aspects. And I've had that before, when people are trying to interview me and they say, well, we just want to talk about this aspect of it, like just this, and you're like, but it just will bleed into this, and bleed into that. You can't, because it's your whole world. And when you think about grief as a relationship between two people, like completely unique, when you and that person are together, only you and that person understand that relationship. When that person goes, they're gone, they're dead, you have a gap that is there in that relationship. But that would have touched many aspects of your life. That would have touched going out and having a drink with them, or texting them, or going to, watch a film with them, or them being there when you had a really sad thing happen to you. Like, that touches many aspects of it. So that loss will affect many aspects of it. And that's the thing with grief. We focus for so many years on, like, oh, it's just about the death of the person. And now we have this term secondary grief, which I think is really helpful, which is the other losses you experience, the other things that, you might have to suddenly sell a house, or you might be, you might lose friends after you've lost a parent, because they don't know what to say to you, and suddenly these people that were really there for you aren't there for you. So there's all these other losses that compound into it. So yeah, it is hard to, I mean, I did try and structure it So
there is a structure, don't get me wrong.
I tried. But yeah, it's hard to simplify grief. And I say that constantly in the book. It's a mess. That's the point of grief. It's a mess. So stop trying to tidy it up, basically.
I think before we get too far in, we should probably get you to read a bit, because I know the passage you've selected actually sets up perfectly what this is. And then we can talk in more detail about some of the nuanced elements of it, if that's all right with you.
Yes. I mean, sets up perfectly is very kind. So I'll do my best. This book is the result of all the conversations and information I gathered trying to find my way through my own grief. At its most useful, it's a map. I can't plan your journey, but I can show you, sketched in felt tip pen on a bit of scrap paper, that this is the route I took. It wasn't easy, but I got there, and today I'm okay. I'm still in the club, even now, all these years later. You don't leave once you've joined. It's a life membership. Grief eases and changes and returns, but it never disappears. If you're searching for an answer to stop it, I can't offer you that, and I wouldn't trust anyone who says they can. But it isn't a hopeless quest to find ways to ease your grief, to look at your grief mess and understand it, to learn how to carry it alongside your life, learn how to hold it in a way that allows you to have joy, but also remember that person and acknowledge the sadness. I know at the start of grief, it can seem impossible it will ever change. That feeling is grief. But like all things, it does change. The depths of futility, of pain, of sadness are all part of the process. Each grief is unique. I will never fully understand yours, as you will never understand that spring in 1998. But we've all felt the agonizing pain and somehow made it through the night.
Beautifully done. I'm glad you picked that passage, because that's a passage I picked to ask you about.
Oh, good.
So you kind of you've helped me. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about it was the club element to it, and I think. And I want to come on to some of the other manuals that are around that you discuss in this as well. But I think what we all look for when we're immersed in something stressful is we all need a fix. And I think we're in a quick fix society.
Yeah.
And so I think we go through grief and we go, okay, well, I've heard there's 5 stages of it, so I'll try and get to the end of those as quickly as possible. Or someone said to me, grief comes in waves. So, okay, well, when will those waves finish? When will it end? I need to know when it will end.
Yeah. And I think the reason I wrote that book is I was that person. I was absolutely that person being like, brilliant, I've got this. Look, I'm very good at researching. I'm really good at reading. I will find out how to fix this, to end it, and then I'll be done. I don't mind putting the time into research. I'm happy to do that. And as long as at the end, the grief F's off. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast.
Yeah, say what you want. I mean, especially when it's from the heart. That's a natural process, isn't it? If you mentioned mortgages earlier. If we're going to apply for a mortgage, you go, right, okay, what do I have to do? Well, I've got to fill all these questionnaires out for the lender. Right, okay, well, I'll do that. But at some point, I know I'm reaching an end. Yeah. And we live for linear narratives. Like that's why we like films. That's why we like things, to be tied up neatly. We don't like things that are hanging because it makes us feel uncomfortable, because we're like, what happened at the end? What did they fall in love? What it makes us feel anxious. And that's why grief is so fucking difficult, because there's no end. There's no end to it. And I fought that for so long. Let me just say, so my dad died when I was 15. I realized I hadn't said that. So I've been talking about this and thinking about it for a long time. And I kept looking for this end and not finding it. And then I turned that into, well, you're doing something wrong. Clearly you're doing something wrong. Like everyone else has finished the quiz. And for some reason you're still in the exam hall, like writing. So it's your fault. And then when I started the Griefcast, the podcast, and I started interviewing people who were at the beginning of the journey, at the same place as me, further ahead, and none of us were finished. And it literally hit me. I thought, oh, I see. You don't need an ending. You just have to accept this is going to be with me. But you just said further ahead. How do the people who are further, how are you judging that? Are they further ahead just purely chronologically?
Oh, chronologically, yeah. Because I think when you're grieving, if you speak to someone, so I'm 20 plus years, and I know when I speak to people who are like 5 years in, and then they speak to me and I say, well, I still feel sad sometimes. They're like, are you joking? What? No, you're 20. You need to be fine. Like, I want to know 20 years, I'm going to be fine. And what I'm trying to say with this book is you will be fine. Grieving doesn't mean I'm, wake up every morning, I fall to my knees and I sob and I have a photo of my dad that I like weep next to. No, grieving means I have a really brilliant life. I, enjoy myself. I laugh. I have a good time. But if you would say to me, are you still sad occasionally your dad died? Yeah, I am. And that's okay. That's okay. That's what we need to change. This idea that instead of looking for an ending, it's okay to still occasionally be sad about something. Once you switch that, like reframe it in your head, then it's much easier to carry that grief, because I don't feel guilty about it. I don't feel ashamed about it. I don't feel like I'm doing something wrong. I just feel like, oh yeah, it's just there. It always will be, because he was a really important person. So of course I'm still occasionally sad. That's okay. I don't have to berate myself for it.
Yeah, I also really like that you discuss anticipatory grief as well, because I think it kind of works both ways, right? You may have not had somebody huge die in your life, but you may have had people who've had really difficult illnesses. So again, I think the really challenging thing when you talk about anything like this is you can only ever really relate it to yourself a lot of the time. So my dad had a really serious stroke when I was 20. So I kind of felt like, and I'm in my late 40s now, so I feel like and he's still alive. I feel like I've been dealing with that for quite a long time. My mum's had breast cancer 3 times. She's on her third bout now. So I think, again, I found the book really helpful to just acknowledge that, yeah, you've already kind of started that process, even though you may not have had the ultimate death coming yet. But yeah, I found, was that kind of quite a big moment for you too, when you discussed this on your podcast and wrote about it as well?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. That sounds really hard. A lot to deal with. And I think what that comes into, and I'm so glad you said it, because I can never say anticipatory grief.
When I said it, I was like, is it anticipatory?
Every time it's on the show, I'm like, and then the guest said it, and I'll be like, yes, what you just said, anticipatory.
Pre-grief,
pre-grief, guys. Because what I find so interesting about that is the rules we've made for grief. So that's what I'm trying to break down, some of these ideas that I just think don't serve us. So the idea that grief has an end, the idea that there's 5 stages you need to get through, the idea that you can't grieve until someone's dead. Like, that's it. If you're not in the full club yet. Like, anticipatory grief exists. As soon as someone gets a diagnosis, as someone has a serious illness, of course your brain begins a grieving process. And that's not to say that it won't change when someone does die. Of course it will, and that is a very different experience. But it's about accepting this grief in our life and going, again, it's okay to feel these things and have those feelings of pre-grief, rather than going, no, I'm not allowed them, that's not proper grief looks like this, grief should be this. And I think we just, as soon as we can move away from what grief should be and actually just look at what it is, it's like, well, if your dad has a stroke when you're 20, are you sad about it? Yes, of course you are. Is that something that's affected everyone? Of course it has. Are you allowed feelings? Of course you are. Rather than this, like, oh, well, that's not proper, it's not proper grief, like this idea that we have. And I talk about that in the book as well, with even when it comes to like miscarriage, baby loss, child loss, we do what we describe on the shows, grief maths. So I've had it as well. People say, oh, your dad died when you're 15. How old are you now? Oh, so it was a while ago. Oh, okay. Or if someone's, loses a pregnancy, and you can see people going, oh, you were 4 weeks. Oh, okay. Like, trying to work out how sad someone should be.
My favorite one of those is when someone's older when they die, and they say,
oh, they love it.
Oh yeah, so-and-so's just died. And they go, how old are they? And you say 92. Oh, they had a good knock.
They had a good innings. Yeah.
As if that makes it all right. They've qualified for death now. You're in that band where it's okay to die.
Yeah. Oh, well, then you shouldn't be sad. Like, 92. Come on, wipe your tears. Like, we're so, and it's because we don't want people to be sad. Like, it comes from a good place. We don't want people to be sad, and what we want to do is quantify everything. It's such a weird. We're like such robots. Like, someone tells us something emotional and we go, oh, how sad should I be? How sad do I think you should be? Rather than going, they're sad, that's sad. Maybe they just need to be sad. Like, it's all trying to fix, like you said, it comes from trying to fix, not wanting people to be upset, rather than being like, oof, this is tough, they're sad. How are we going to deal with this? I'm just going to have to sit with them in this sadness for a little bit and allow yourself to do that. But my God, that takes practice. Like, it's not easy.
And how have you found it authoring this book, and obviously fronting the podcast for a number of years now too, knowing, I mean, I'm aware that I just did it myself, like, people tell you their grief stories unprompted, whenever you're out and about, and just knowing that you've really opened yourself up to allow that. Does it ever get too much? How do you kind of keep a boundary for yourself in that?
Well, thank the gods for therapy. I wrote about that in the book. I started therapy at the same time as I started the podcast, but completely, well, I didn't think it was conscious, but obviously it probably was, because I was on a waiting list, and so they just came through and said, oh, you can finally see someone. And then I started the podcast. So that is a huge part of it for me, because yes, I really don't mind people sharing the stories at all. It's part of the job, and it's a privilege to hear those stories. And what I think I've got better at is understanding that people don't need me to fix them, because that's how I used to feel, of like, oh, well, let me tell you how you're going to be okay. And now I try and go, oh yeah, that sounds really hard. I'm really sorry. And it's such unusual behavior. Like, you can tell people, like, oh, like we just did there, like, oh no, don't acknowledge my sadness. It's fine. It's all right. It's fine. Make it disappear. And actually it's fine just to be like, oh, that's hard. I interviewed the brilliant Rob Delaney, and his brilliant book that just came out, A Heart That Works, about the death of his son Henry. And we were talking about how, obviously, with child death, people find it so hard, and I so do I. It's hideous to talk about. It's really hard. But we were saying, like, really what someone is asking for is about 4 seconds of your time. Really. If you can just for 4 seconds not change the subject, feel your own emotions, panic, if you can just for 4 seconds be like, oh, that is really hard what they're going through, and allow them just to pause and give them that actually is what most people want. You don't want like a half-hour therapy session unless you're paying for the therapy session.
Let's remember, we are British, okay?
Yeah, so exactly. You don't want a full breakdown, but just to give someone 4 seconds of like, oh gosh, that's really, really difficult, and to not change the subject, and to pause and wait for them to go, yeah, it is. Anyway, how are you? Like, let them be the instigator of that. Like, it's not that much, but we do it's the panic. It is the panic. So in answer to your question, zigzagging around as I do, I have a lot of therapy. Still do.
Just relating to what you were just saying as well, I think sometimes, certainly I've been in a position where when I've told somebody about a bereavement, I've not necessarily wanted them to show any empathy towards me. I just want them to be aware that it might affect my behavior. I'm kind of telling you, because in a minute I might go mental at you, or I might just start crying for no good reason. Or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that, again, it's that thing of, I talk about in the book that we don't have the black armbands anymore. So we don't have this Victorian way which we can communicate and just say to someone. It's much harder to say, oh yeah, gosh, this happened actually, and so I might be a bit teary today. And like, why don't we just say it? Because I think most of us, if someone said it to you, no one would be like, oh my God, why do they tell me? Like, most people would be like, oh God, I'm so sorry. Of course, thank you for telling me. Can I get you a cup of tea? But we, the griever, feel like, oh God, this is so silly, I shouldn't say anything. And I think it's it's slightly controversial in the grief world, but I think it's a two-way street. I don't think it's enough to say, oh, all the people out there should practice talking about death and they should get better at it. I also think grieving people need to be strong and be brave and say, hey, I need you to acknowledge this. I know that's so hard. I know it's not always possible, but I think if we can start again practicing, like you said, saying, I'm just telling you this just happened, so and letting it sit there and hang in the air for 4 seconds. And then being like, oh, the world didn't implode. They didn't fire me from my job. They just said, oh, okay, gosh, sorry about that. Which
I think that probably comes with like many feelings as well. And grief is kind of tied up with a lot of them. It was reminding me, we were just sitting on the sofa last night. My daughter had already gone to bed. She's 14. My son's 9. And me, my son and my husband were just watching the US version of Ghosts, which is actually getting really good. I'm really into it. Yeah, the characters are developing very well. But I just had a bit of I think it's perimenopausal, a bit like premenstrual as well. And I just sat there and I was like, can somebody just make me some toast? Because I think I'm going to cry. And both my son and my husband looked at me and went, okay. Yeah, okay. And I was like, thanks very much. I don't know why, but yeah, that would really help me right now.
Yeah, that's so great. If you can get asked for your needs, I mean, my God, that's so important. It's so important. And if you don't, and I do understand with grief, it's really hard, but if you don't say, it is hard. Like, it's two-way, everyone needs to get better and everyone needs to try and have these conversations and practice them. But if you can also say, and I think this is hard. I'm just trying to think if I've ever done that, but it is, you could say to someone, oh, when you talk about my dad dying, do you mind just like checking if I'm in the mood for it? You know what I mean? Like there's other ways you can be, if you feel like somebody's done it in not quite the right way. Like I feel like we can have these conversations, but we're all so afraid of upsetting and offending each other. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy.
Can we? I mentioned it earlier about the 5 stages of grief,
yes.
which I just kind of use as a throwaway phrase, but it's actually comes from a book from 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying, which you reference in your book, and you're critical of it, but you also are very encouraging of the fact that she wrote the book in the first place. So I wonder whether you could explain that kind of juxtaposition of your views for us.
Yeah, it's the first chapter, and the chapter basically is fuck off 5 stages. But I wanted to, when I said that, I thought that's quite bold, Cariad. I want to caveat that very clearly with like, she's an amazing woman. She's incredible. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was an amazing woman, and so she wrote this book in 1969 on death and dying. She was working in palliative care, so she was working in hospitals because hospices didn't really exist then. She was part of the hospice movement. She was part of that process that said, oh, we should have places where people go to die rather than being in hospital. And she was working in America at a time when they wouldn't even say cancer. They would just call everything a malignancy. And they weren't telling people they had cancer. So people were going into hospital. They say, oh, you might have a malignancy. We're going to give you some medicine. They didn't know the medicine was basically palliative care. They were going to die. So they literally weren't telling people. People were sitting there thinking, oh, that's good. I'll get better. I don't need to make any plans or have any conversations with my family because I'm getting better. And when you say that out loud, it's insane. It's like, oh my God, so people just dying, not knowing they were dying of cancer. So she wrote this book very quickly, actually, after doing a research project. And it became, instant bestseller. Was incredible. And she was, one of the first people to talk about death and say, hey, I think when someone's dying of a terminal illness, specifically cancer, we should tell them. And when we do tell them, this is what happens. They go through 5 stages. So when you tell someone they're going to die, they seem to go through these 5 distinct stages of, I'll forget now, but like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think I just did them all. And they get to a place where they accept they're going to die. And if you tell them this, it means they have a bit of a peaceful death and they can talk to their family, and it's just a much better way of dying. I mean, full fair play. Absolutely agree with you. Couldn't agree more. That sounds like a good idea. But what happened was it started being applied to people who were grieving. I don't know when, and I don't know how. I can't find the change, but it just became, oh, when someone dies, you go through 5 stages. It was never ever meant for that, ever. And she even said years later it's kind of been misinterpreted, and she reworked it. And it's not to say you don't go through distinct phases of grief, but you don't go through 5, and it's not linear, and you don't end up at acceptance. And if you ask anyone in the club, they will tell you, no, I haven't found myself just acceptance where I don't think about it and it's absolutely fine, and I have I'm neutral on my emotions for it. So when I started writing the book, I sort of realized, like, even though it was written in 1969, it's still used as an example. And when I do live events for Griefcast, people still come up to me and say, oh, I don't think I'm doing my 5 stages very well. It's 2023. 2023. Like, what?
But Cariad, sorry, just to know what's interesting for me is, so they're still referring to this book from 69 in 2023. Yeah. Your book's out now in 2023, but I can't think of anything in between that's had the cultural punch through.
No.
Can you?
No, and not at all. And I talk about it in the book because the reason why it's wouldn't it be great if it was true? Like, that's why I think it's got the cultural punch through, because we want it to be true.
Yeah.
Like, that is so tasty. Oh, 5 stages now, I'm fine. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Like, and if you said to someone like, oh, it's like a pyramid scheme, like, oh, you do this and like join up and you'll be a millionaire. Like, we all know anything that sounds too easy, we're like, that sounds a bit dodgy. That's probably not true. That's not how life works. But with grief, oh yeah, brilliant. Oh yeah. 5 stages and I'll be done. And I get so many emails, people saying, oh, I want to get to the end. And you're like, I bet you do, but that's not That's not what grief. This is the thing. Grief is not asking you to get to the end. Grief is asking you to feel. And grief is saying to you, you love this person, or even if you had a complicated relationship with them and you felt like you didn't love them, they affected you in some way, and their death is making you feel all these feelings: sadness, regret, loss, pain, happiness, joy, all of these feelings. And grief is saying to you, feel them. You have to feel me, and then I will calm down. And 5 stages cheats us into like, oh, if you do them in the right order, you win, and then it's done. I don't know any aspect of life so that's true for.
I don't know anyone who's getting the t-shirt that says grief completed it, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Done the levels, got the big baddie, and I don't really play it anymore. I mean, you can certainly, I definitely, having spoken about it for so long, I'm at a place, I wouldn't call it acceptance. I would say I've accepted that grief is a part of my life and always will be. And that for me is very peaceful. So then when it does crop up, when I have a grief wave, when I feel sad, I don't fight it. I don't run away from it. I just feel like, oh, okay, hello, here you are again. Thought you'd arrive. Been a few months, been a few years even as it goes further on. So it's again, reframing it in your head of like, accept that you're going to feel like this forever, but not that you're going to feel broken into pieces. You can't get out of bed. Like grief changes. But the idea that 5 stages and like you said, you can just walk away from it. I'm really sorry.
But you write really beautifully as well about so much of it is about recognizing when these things happen. And as I mentioned earlier, you've woven various anecdotes from people throughout the book as well, which beautifully illustrates this point. There were 2 that really struck out for me. There was one from Felix White, who I really, really like Felix White. I really like the way that he kind of talks, and obviously his music with the Maccabees, but he talks about he lost his mum when he was younger, and he had a recent birthday now.
Yeah.
And he just had a tantrum, and he's like, somebody offered me a cake, and he's like, I'm going to throw the cake. I just know in his head, he was like, I'm just going to throw the cake. And like that kind of came from acting out.
Yeah, and I think I've talked to Felix a lot because I'm pretty sure he lost his mum when he was 14. I lost my dad when I was 15. And so we are what I call the teenage grief club.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very specific niche of you didn't get to be a teenager because you had to deal with grief. And, you know, his mum was very ill beforehand as well. So he had to, you know, deal with that and not muck around and be stupid and who cares. And I'm going to go out tonight. Nothing matters because you're at home. You're like, oh, it does. You might die. And so it's a really strange place to grow up, the teenage grief club, because you get very old very quickly, but you are still a teenager. So you don't really understand why you got old very quickly. So yeah, his example in his being in, I think he was nearly 30 by that point.
Yeah.
And he had this birthday party and he was like, I'm going to throw a cake because I never got to do this. I never got to do these things when I was a teenager. And he just threw his cake into the audience. They were like, obviously probably loved it. But yeah, that teenage grief club is a strange niche. And everyone has their own niche of the grief club, which I talk about a lot in the book. But I really wanted the book not just to be my voice, because my story, the grief story, although it's sad, the point of the book is to say, it's not like, oh, I had this unbelievably strange, unique experience. It's like, no, look how many of us are here. There's so many. And having interviewed nearly 200 people, I took extracts from the podcast, and just every time I hit on a point that I was like, oh, there's like at least 7 or 8 of us that said that, I would find the quote to be like, okay, this is where we all agreed. We all said this and we all said this. Even though your grief is unique, there's all these touching points that I think we can share.
And I just wanted to mention
Grief
briefly,
Club, great name for an indie band, by the way.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah, TGC, Teenage Grief Club. Yeah, I know.
I just wanted to mention briefly one of the sweetest stories, I thought, that again was, I think, an example that there's a lot of humor in this book too, but a lot of so much heart in it as well. Would you mind just saying your Jack D experience of?
It's so embarrassing. I wrote it down and then I've had to talk about it. And I'm like, oh God. So yeah, I'm a comedian. That's another of my jobs. And I was on a gig. We got sent somewhere, like, I don't remember. It's like Dorset or something. We had to drive there and drive back. And some gigs, if they're like super organized, they'll be like this, oh, meet at Clapham station, you're all getting in. And it was something like a panel show that Jack was hosting. I didn't know him that well. He's, a very, very lovely man. And we'd driven down and it'd been fine. We'd driven back and it's like really late at night and they're dropping us all off at Hammersmith and it's like pouring with rain, horrible London night. It's about 1:30 in the morning. And Jack, it was me and another girl, and then 2 guys, and not I could tell he was a bit more worried about the girls, which is absolutely fine. So we got out of the car, and he got out of the car in the rain, and he watched me get into the taxi. And the whole time he was doing it, I thought, what's he doing? It's so weird. Why is he watching me get into it? I'm just getting in a taxi. And he gave me like a thumbs up, like, you got your taxi? Yeah. Because we were sort of like pulled over in the side of the road by Hammersmith Station. It's really busy. He gives me a thumbs up and looks at me. And I was like, yeah, got my taxi. Like, what's okay? Bit weird. And I got in and I looked back and he was still looking, like just checking, she's definitely gone. And I remember I was in the back of the car and I started crying. And I thought, why are you crying? What? Like, I was so confused. And then I was like, oh, that's what dads do, isn't it? Like, dads like look at you and make sure you got in cabs. And I haven't had one since I was 15. So I honestly, it was like alien behavior. I was like, okay, he's making sure I get into a car at 1:30 a.m. Why? Like, I know how to walk. And it was just so funny to me that I didn't recognize it. That's what made me cry, that I was like an alien who'd never had a father. It was like, oh, I don't really understand what you're doing. Oh, I see. Nurturing father figure. Right. Yeah. That is not something I recognize straight away. So yeah, I was so sad. And then in my head, I was like, stop making Jack D your dad. He's not. It just was too, he's kind of like, doesn't look anything like him, but my dad had brown hair, was shortish. And so I was like, oh yeah, you look, and he's probably about the age then that my dad was when he died. So I think it just all triggered a response, which, we talk about so much on the show. Like, you can see someone in M&S and from the back, they like just look like your person buying the thing that your person used to buy. And you just get hit with this, oh my God, there they are. Oh no, they're not. And it's, yeah, I wanted to write about it to say, like, it's all right if you have these cheesy moments, it's okay. You're not alone.
I wanted to ask you about the writing process, because we are a books podcast. How did you find getting this all down onto the page, and did you enjoy the process of writing it? Are you used to that because you're writing as a comedian and when you're doing your other bits of broadcast work?
It was really hard. I've been thinking about, like, should I lie and say, oh, it was a pleasant? No, it was really hard. For many reasons, it's hard to write about grief. When you're writing comedy, obviously, like, you get to have jokes, and I did put jokes into this. Like, it is surprisingly funny occasionally, but I was having to write about my like the depths of my grief that I hadn't really investigated. But what also
can I just say, sorry, you should put that quote on your own back cover. Surprisingly funny occasionally, Cariad Lloyd, my own book.
I have said to people when I've asked myself, it's cheerier than you'd expect. Yeah, I got the deal in 2019, and then I found out I was pregnant with my second child. So I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. Like, we just got to get lots of childcare, make sure really supported, and it's my second time round, so I knew what to expect. He was born 5 days before the first lockdown. So I went from having a book and a newborn to deal with to a global pandemic and my other child at home and no working space at all. And all the care, my mum was going to come and help. She couldn't come around. So it was just completely isolated. And then I went from, which, that in itself was a bit tricky. And then having to write about grief when the world was grieving. So like every time I sat at my desk.
Sucks.
Oh my God, the timing. It was so weird, actually, because I went into my little grief cave to research, ancient grief rituals, or what the Victorians did, or what grief psychologists are saying we should do instead of the 5 stages. So I'm like fully in grief research. And then I would turn around and look at the world, and the world was feeling exactly as I did. So it was very strange, because in one way it was horrible, because I never got distracted. I never got to just go out with my friends and have a night off from death. You turn the radio on, it's like another counter, they're telling you how many people have died that day, while you've also been researching how people die. So it felt like immersive therapy. So that process was unfortunate timing, I guess, is a polite way of saying it. Sort of like, wow, could have done without the world also collapsing as I had to write about my own grief. But then, I don't know, I'm a very sort of practical person. I was like, well, is it easier because everybody is also feeling the same way you are? I'm willing to have intense conversations in the way that you are right now. So it was hard, but it felt kind of necessary. Also with the pandemic, I felt like, oh, this book might actually be useful. So it drove me a little bit to go, this isn't just like a super niche club, like this has actually affected all of us somehow. So perhaps this book is needed. in a way that maybe in 2019 it was like, oh, sure, yeah, sure, some of us want to read that.
And is there more to say? Is there a second book, or would you like to use this as a springboard into fiction? Do you like the idea of sitting at a laptop and creating something on the written page?
Yeah, I do now. I didn't at the start. I think I'm a very collaborative person. I'm an improviser. I have a show called Ostentatious where I do improvise Jane Austen, and most of my comedy life has been working with other people. So it was a real switch to doing it by myself. But I feel like I've got there. So yeah, I would like to write a lot more and a lot more fiction. I think I'd definitely like a break from full-on grief chats and maybe write something silly next, just have a break and then come back to it, because I'll always come back to it.
I've got one more selfish question, if you don't mind. And that is, and it's been on my mind whilst we've been talking to you, and that is that I'm in the fortunate position of, at time of recording, having both parents still alive. What are the conversations I should be having with them now before it's too late?
That's a good question. Not selfish at all. So I always say start with the great icebreaker, funerals. Just start with funerals, because nobody minds talking about funerals, even if people are icky about it. It's not like the worst conversation. So you could start with very simple, like, do you want to be buried or cremated? What music do you want? Do you want flowers? Is there anyone you don't want there? Because you could be surprised by that answer. Like, really? You actually hate them? Okay. What do they want to do with the ashes if they want to be cremated? There's lots of books. The one I've seen recently is called The Death Book, which it's actually made by a woman who makes these amazing things called space masks, which are like relaxing eye masks. And she had a lot of trouble after one of her parents died. She didn't have the information, so she created this thing called The Death Book, which is just like a red notebook binder with all the questions, and you just give it to the person and they just write down exactly what they want, and then you just say, by the way, that book is in this drawer. So I think that can be just so helpful.
Super handy.
Super handy. Just write it all down. Here's a book with all the questions. If you can have that conversation and that goes okay, then I think you can start having the next conversation, which is really hard, which is like advanced care planning, which is something that I only knew about from doing the Griefcast, of what kind of medical treatment does somebody want if there's an accident, if they have a stroke, if they go into a vegetative state, like all this stuff that I think we get much more squeamish talking about. But actually, if you speak to any palliative care nurse or palliative care doctor, consultant, people who work in hospices, they will say, please have those conversations. Like, please, because you don't want to be having them when it's too late. They've already died, or they're on morphine and they can't answer you, or everyone's so full of emotion they don't know what to say. So I think again, it's practice, because I've got better at the lighter end of it, of like funeral chat. I've over the 6 years of doing this show have moved on to the other slightly more heavy conversations where you're like, oof, okay, I'm actually going to ask my mum this question. And it's horrible. And then afterwards you're like, right, change the subject, have a cup of tea. Don't want to think about that. But to just sort of open the door and be like, just what do you want? And also, where are the things? Where are the passwords? How, like, is there a will? Where are your bank accounts? Like, just the very basic, like, even if it's, all my money's under the bed in your dad's bedroom, but he doesn't know. Like, just the very basic information that you just can't get once someone's gone. And I get so many people saying, 2 stories are told on the show all the time. The one where we had the conversation, we prepared, we opened the drawer, everything to the letter was done. It was really easy. And therefore we could begin our grieving process. And the other conversation is, we didn't know where anything was. We didn't know what had happened. They didn't have a will. This wasn't in someone's name. Everything got taken to somewhere else, and then you're dealing with sadmin, as they jokingly call it, when you want to be grieving.
And the other thing is not rushing to tell some institutions that, some extended family have told the bank too quickly. The bank have shut accounts down and then they've got no access to money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, stuff like that. I think it's really important that you know where it is, but you don't have to act immediately. But that often happens because people, when someone dies, you feel useless. Like that is the immediate feeling, is useless. Even if you knew they were going to die, even if it's terminal illness, you feel like, why did that happen? How did I not stop that? And so the getting on with the admin can sometimes be like a soothing process of like, well, I'm going to call the bank, I'm going to do this, and that's going to make me feel like today it's okay, I did something. So it can be quite a common feeling to like get on with it. But again, you don't have to, but just have the knowledge is power, like have that with you.
And you mentioned it in the book as well, those questions that you wish you'd always asked, like, did you ever like learn this sport, or did you do that, or even kind of how did you feel about some things? And I think, so my dad as well, he's now in a care home, he's got dementia and Alzheimer's, and I kind of wrestled with quite a lot of, oh, should I have asked this? And it's quite a difficult relationship with him anyway. And I was like, he's never going to actually answer those things. And I think sometimes accepting that when it gets to that late stage in life, you think, oh, I wish I'd asked like this, and this. And you're like, well, the person that he was anyway, he never would have answered it anyway. So
it's hard, isn't it? I think it's knowledge, isn't it? It's like, did I try and ask, or do I know the answer already? Is there someone else I can ask who actually can tell me and can provide a different answer on a different opinion of them? Because really what you're trying to do with grief is piece someone back together who's not there. And you never will. Like, you'll never piece them back. And I've had it with my dad of like, since I've started talking about him publicly, you know, like certain relatives or people who knew him might have sent me an email, and it's just like little nuggets. You're like, oh right, that's interesting, now I see that, I can see that. And the same thing can happen with you, like as you get older and you get nearer understanding what they might have gone through, or as a parent, as the life they lived, and you think, oh, I see, that's why they did that, because that's how it feels to be this age. I didn't know that when I was younger. I thought they were mad, or I thought they were being a pain in the ass. I see.
Well, they were just really tired.
They were just really tired. Yeah, I've definitely had that with my dad, of being like, oh yeah, God, I thought he was so crap at some things. You're like, oh, he was really tired. He was really, really tired and stressed running his own business. So yeah, fair play. It's never simple.
We always end with trying to get some other reading recommendations from our guests. And it doesn't have to be nonfiction, it can be fiction. I'm also always pushing for cookbooks because I love a good cookbook. But yeah, anything that you would recommend people dip into reading right now?
Well, I'm on a bit, because this book was such a part of my life for so long, and I couldn't really do any other reading that wasn't death. I'm like joyfully reading at the moment. So I've just finished loads. I finished The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. That's right, isn't it? I really enjoyed that. If you like grief, I'd also recommend Hamnet that she wrote.
I still haven't tried it. I've got Hamnet on my Kindle. I've had it for a really long time, but I'm kind of like, I know it's going to really like.
Can I just clarify? We're saying Hamnet in case people haven't.
Hamnet, yes. So that was.
There's no Yorick in this one.
No, well, it's about Shakespeare's son, who was called Hamnet, although there's many spellings, so it was also called Hamlet. So the play, but he was mainly written down as Hamnet, and it is about the death of Shakespeare's son. It is I'm not going to lie, you need to go in with your tissues, but it is so good. The writing is so brilliant. That I thoroughly recommend it. Although, didn't you just say your children are 14 and 9?
Yeah.
Wait, don't read it yet, because mine are really young. So I think he's 12 in the book, and I spoke to a lot of people who said they had to wait till everyone was past 12, or it was so far away that But my Marriage Portrait, I really enjoyed. I'm a massive Hilary Mantel fan. And I feel like she hits that Mantel kind of historical detail, but also good story. Not quite as detailed as like Wolf Hawk, but like The Marriage Portrait is really interesting. It's set in like the Medicis, Italy. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm also reading one, I'm halfway through, called Vagabonds, which is by Elagosa Osade. I hope I'm saying that right. Which is like magical realism set in Lagos. It's absolutely amazing. I've never read anything like it. Like, it's just loads of short stories, but sort of sewn together with this kind of spirit of Lagos, who's kind of like this mischievous figure that causes loads of mischief, and weirdly old-fashioned and modern at exactly the same time, like smashed together. But that is absolutely brilliant. And I just started, because I have many on the go, Ordinary People by Diana Evans, is that right? I'm loving that. I'm halfway through that. And I read a lot of different books on the go. Elif Shafak, 10 minutes and 38 seconds, something to change the world or something, which I'm also very much enjoying. So all fiction, because I'm having a break, because I just did my own non-fiction. So I'm treating myself to...
Can I ask you something people ask me whenever I say I've got more than one book on the go? How do you juggle your books? Because you mentioned about 5 there.
Yeah, I have one book. So like The Marriage Portrait, I actually did take out with me, even though it's very heavy. Normally the heavy book is like bedtime reading.
Yeah.
And then I have stuff on the Kindle that I read when the kids are trying to get to sleep, because I have to be in the room holding hands at the moment.
Yeah.
So then I can read that and like not obviously I can see the page. And then I have a commute book, like take it with me because it's light and it's easy. So I've just to be fair, I finished Marriage Portrait and Hamnet, and so the two Vagabonds is on the bedside table, and Elif Shafak is coming with me, and Ordinary People's on the Kindle. So I didn't used to. I used to be quite religious about, no, you read a book, you only read that till it's finished. And then I had kids and it's impossible. So
yeah, no, I do the same too. And I also
read
think
when
that
you can.
if you kind of change your thinking about it, so that it's a bit like we can all manage to watch multiple TV series at a time, right? So it's kind of the same with books. I might not be in the mood for that one that I downloaded the other day, so I want to kind of do the fun one, or I want a bit of nonfiction. So I have the same. I have multiple on the go.
Yeah, actually, I've just finished Michael Rosen's new nonfiction. I got sent a proof, Getting Better, for a nonfiction recommendation, which was just brilliant. He's so brilliant, and that was a really lovely, like a really enjoyable nonfiction read, just to spend time with someone. Yeah, it depends what mood you're in. Treat yourself. Don't be so strict.
What an amazing time we've had with you, Cariad. Thank you so much for coming on Bestsellers. We've really, really enjoyed talking with you.
I hope so. I'm sorry, I talk a lot, so it's okay, because it's very hard to
You're
switch
talking
it
to
off.
two people who can talk a glass eye to sleep. You've got no problem with talking on this podcast.
This is my people. Yeah. This is what I want. I don't want people
who
are
your
like
tribe. It's all good.
Yeah, the people who do the massive silence. I'm like, I can't do it, guys. I can't. Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk about the book. I really appreciate it.
Some brilliant recommendations there from Cariad Lloyd, and I know you're a fan of the Griefcast as well, aren't you? And you've listened to that.
Yeah, and she's one of those people, I think, who has such honesty and warmth in what she's talking about, and also she talks about it. She manages to do quite a neat thing, I think, where she feels like she has a real authority on the subject because of what she's lived through and what she's experienced, losing her dad so young. But also it's never like patronizing or condescending, or, you never kind of feel like you're being spoken to about something. Correct. She's very inclusive and
it's not didactic, is it?
No, she welcomes lots of other opinions and thoughts, and just seems really open to sort of hearing from people and what they've been through and trying to help, really. I guess that's where it comes from, right? She kind of wants to do good.
Yeah.
It's not kind of an ego trip.
I almost felt, talking to her, I felt like she eased any of the anxieties I was having about death and questions around death and her dad dying and that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I felt like she almost gave you the permission. There are certain people in life who are really good at setting you at ease, and there are others who make you feel like you've done everything wrong. And she's definitely the former, isn't she? And that's why she probably breaks through so much.
Yeah. And she carries it so well now, I think, too. I mean, obviously, again, as she said, when we spoke to her, it's been a long time forming that, because it's not as if she's had an easy ride at all. But I'm really impressed with how well she carries it and how well she invites those conversations and doesn't seem to be dragged down by them. Because you'd imagine that if people want to talk to you about that all the time, it must be really challenging, but she does it so well. And I didn't get in too much of my own like neuroses, maybe a little bit, but that's fine. We'll save it for another time.
I always feel this is part therapy for both of us anyway.
I think so. Yeah. I think
having a podcast and not being able to make the best of it, is there?
Yeah, well, I think, do you have that thing where, I mean, I sort of forget that anybody's listening. So I'm just chatting to you, and then I'll stop a recording sometimes and be like, oh,
what have I said?
What did you do?
Do you know what, though? Honestly, I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, you've done stuff on stage before. If you suddenly think how many people are in this theatre, you'd collapse. Whereas by the time the lights are on you can't see the audience. You just think, well, I know there's a crowd there somewhere. And then you get a bit of feedback from the crowd through laughter or through a gasp or what have you. Same thing with this, isn't it? I think if you were to focus on how many people you're talking to, you don't do that. You're talking to just one person at any time, aren't you?
Yeah, always. Yeah, because I've had that sometimes with some friends and stuff, because I'd say like I'm quite shy really in some ways, and they're like, oh, but like you were on Radio 1, like how can you have been shy? And it's like, well, because most of the time it's like this, it's just talking to one person in a room. And if you think about the other stuff, I think, well, that's where there are some egomaniacs, right? But I never did, so that's my excuse.
So the book's called You Are Not Alone. It's not your, I don't want you to search with a hyphen. It's You Are Not Alone, Cariad Lloyd, and that is out right now. And how long have we been doing this podcast for? Do you know, roughly? Would you have a guess?
Did we start it during COVID?
No, way before.
Did we?
Yeah.
Oh, in my head, I'm like, oh, we're one of those people who are like, let's do a podcast in the pandemic.
No, 2019 we started this in the
Nice.
summer. It was a hot summer of 2019.
Oh, we
and I remember,
did.
yeah. And I remember coming down to London where you are and being in
Yeah.
a very sweaty small box of a hotel room the night before we did David Nichols for the first ever bestseller.
I don't want to listen back to that one. I think I was a bit giddy.
That's all right. That's allowed too.
Yeah, it's allowed. Yeah.
You know, that's another
writing.
reason we're doing this is to get to interview people that we love, and we love David's work.
Yeah.
Anyway, the reason I mention that is we've been doing it for 4 years, and I know podcasts has grown tremendously, and some of them now they've got whole production teams on them, and they've got marketing budgets and all the rest of it. And we just want you to know this is just me and Nat. It's just the two of us, and we do everything. We book the writers, we do the recordings, we do the research, we read the books, we edit the podcasts, which you can probably tell. And so it's just, we are a two-person operation. And so we finally caught up with the rest of the world, and we have enrolled on Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com, which is called, it's meant to sound like coffee. And the reason they call it Ko-fi apparently is because it rhymes with no fee, and they don't charge a fee if you'd like to buy Natalie and me a brew, basically.
Yeah.
So you can do this by going to ko-fi.com/bestsellerspodcast, all one word, ko-fi.com/bestsellerspodcast, all one word. And then if you'd like to buy us a coffee, if you're enjoying what we've done for you so far in the 4 or 5 seasons that we've managed, and you enjoy hearing from these writers, and you've found a book through us that you wouldn't have found otherwise by not listening to bestsellers, and you can buy us a coffee on there. And we would hugely appreciate that, because it would be a nice way to know that you've enjoyed the fruits of our labours.
Yeah, and also I think just a way to encourage us to keep going, because we do really enjoy doing it, but it is really time consuming. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. It's a privilege to be able to do this and speak to these authors, but you and I do have freelance day jobs as well. So often it's kind of like squeezing these in like late nights or at weekends. And yeah, it does. Well, hopefully our production values are all right, which means that it does take a bit of time to get each episode together by the time you kind of planned it, booked it, edited it, done all the reading, and uploaded it to Acast, which is what we pay for to put it out there. So yeah, it would just be really well received if you want to buy us a coffee and say thanks.
Now, the cynical part of me thinks that you might be thinking, listen to them asking us for a who they think they are, right? And if that's you, then I just want you to know that in a couple of weeks' time, when we do Curtis Sittenfeld, I've had to ban children's bath time in my house to accommodate that recording. These are the sacrifices we're making, all right? Surely that's worth it.
Now, some would think that that's is that a sacrifice?
Or a blessing. No, that will, trust me, because they'll go, right, they'll come running up to the bath, and then my other half will go, no, stop, Daddy's recording. And then they'll go, oh, especially the younger one. The younger one's learned that from something or other. So instead of objecting with words, he just goes and growls at you like a bear. So
yes,
there'll be much growling going on.
Just briefly before we... Okay, so at the weekend, it was my mum's 80th birthday. And me and my sister,
happy birthday
and I, yeah, we organised a lunch with some of her friends in the town where we grew up. And it was quite nerve-wracking to organise it and to kind of get a bunch of 80-year-olds all in one room and make sure it was all okay. But what made me think of that just now was that the conversation started with like, oh, Natalie, you were touch as a kid. Like, you were such a difficult child. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. Nice to see you too.
Really?
So, I have empathy with you. And yeah, I don't think I was difficult. I was just boisterous.
Now, you see, I mean, we're going to go down a different road here, but so if I'd have been you as a boy, would I have been boisterous, or would I just have been confident?
Maybe. I was always very confident and assertive as a kid, and then had it knocked out of me as life took hold.
By whom? Give me an address, I'll go around there.
The world, Phil.
Right, so it's ko-fi.com/bestsellerspodcast if you'd care to buy us a brew. And we'll be telling you a bit more about that. And as we kind of learn how to use it, then we'll offer some exclusive content on there for you as well.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. So we'll be doing that in the next few weeks. Next time out, Natalie Jameson, it is the only the second time this has happened, I think, on bestsellers. It is a returning author. Anthony Horowitz was the first person that we had back a second time, and now we get to welcome Jojo Moyes
back to the bestsellers fold, and what a delight it is.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant comedy. It's a really good, if you need cheering up and if you need to escape this world that we're all suffering in at the moment, this is the book for you. Someone Else's Shoes is the book. So you'll hear from Jojo next time.